couple of things about the Sailboat Dun. First, very important for the wing. Once we start getting into bigger flies, by that I mean like size 10, size 8, snowshoe becomes less of an option and poly becomes a better option. 12 and 14, well 12 is, it could be either, 14 could be either, 16 down, 16, 18, 20, 22 and so on. Snowshoe is definitely the preferable option. I'm going to tie this with snowshoe. I think snowshoe is a fantastic material for this fly. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind as you're tying. First off, you want to make sure that you split the tails with this really strong angle. I have a pretty cool way of doing that I'll show you in just a minute. And the second thing is that what really matters is not what you see when you look at from the side as the fly is being tied, but rather what you have underneath. And if you see, there's a little bit of a bulky thorax / head area right here from where you tied in the butts of the snowshoe, and the bump becomes even bigger when you use poly. But from the underneath, it just looks like a continuation of the thorax. So don't let that bother you. That's not a problem. You'll catch plenty of fish with that. The fish will never know the difference, okay? And also look at how the hackle fibers splay out so as to support the fly in the film. I trim it pretty close. You can see right here, looking at the bottom, a little bit of lift, but not a lot. This is very much in the old thorax style of tying by Vince Marinaro. So, ordinarily speaking, I would not tie an olive this big, but because this is for teaching purposes and we want to be able to see as best we can, I put on a little bit of an extra big hook. Okay, so I start with some olive thread and strip off plenty of that olive thread as you're going to start. Normally, you know what, thread's not cheap, so being the hoarder that we fly tyers are, I generally speaking would never leave this much thread at the end. But I'm going to now for reasons that will become apparent. All right, every time I set one of these up, I don't exactly make it level. There we go. Okay, so always coat the shank in thread. Very important. It gives the material something to bite into. And then you'll notice where, this is very true on hooks, where the barb would be. This is a barbless hook. If you go straight up, that's exactly where the bend starts. So I want to make sure that I'm right on that point there. And if there's a barb, it's easy to follow, but find that point. There's generally a symmetry in the bend of the hook, and that'll tell you where, if you want a tail to go out straight, you want to begin your tail. So I now have some microfivets, or microfivets, however they're properly pronounced. I usually use 2 of them. I have a guy I'm starting to be friends with as a fly tyer, a guy named Eric Naguski, who's very, very, very good. I tied next to him at the International Fly Tyer Symposium, and he always uses 4. I don't think it makes a difference. We both catch fish. Okay, so you'll notice that those microfivets are directly on top of the hook shank, and now I go back and I grab that long extra piece of thread that I just cut off. Where did it go? Round and round, nobody knows. Okay. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I can't seem to find it, so I'm just going to cut off a piece of the brown. That's how a professional handles an emergency situation. Here's the pretty slick trick. Take that piece and loop around the hook like this. Separate your tails and come right up in between with the hook there. See that? And the tighter you pull that thread, pull it real tight, you'll splay them real far. Don't pull it quite as tight. But I did notice I was making a mistake. Always check for mistakes as you go along. I didn't work my thread back to the original tying point. So now, I'll do it one more time, which is good for teaching purposes. Remember, we looped it around the bend of the hook and just pull it right up in between the 2 microfivets. And look at that beautiful split of the tails that we have there. Okay? All right, this is really a very simple fly to tie, and that technique is very easy to learn if you don't use it yet. All right, next up, forming the body. Now, this is a very interesting fly. I probably mentioned this before in the presentation, but fish have a very difficult time ignoring this fly. Where we fish, you constantly see, I'm in a drift boat, and I'm able to see how the fish react to flies. And they really, really, really they will always come up and investigate this fly. They do not always take it, but where I'm fishing, they don't always take anything. I have two different colors here of EP fibers. And what I'm going to do is mix them because I like that mottled effect. I talked about that on the Parashell caddis with the dubbing. And this fly does not have a dubbing abdomen. So I go with some EP fibers. You know, when you start getting into really bigger flies, like if I was tying a Hendrickson, I would use a dubbing body. And by that I mean a fat fly. If I was doing a Drake, March Brown, definitely a dub body. But olives and sulfurs, they're more diminutive, and I would not use a dub body for them. Okay, so here's my EP fibers. Again, whatever you can get, and a little mixture of colors here. And all I'm going to do is wrap down to the tails and back, trying to get the slightest taper out of the deal. I went slower there just to make sure I didn't crush or misplace the tails, and also to keep this taper going. Now I'm going to bunch these turns a little closer together to just build this body up a little bit, and it's not much because I do not believe in, particularly for olives, which this is, or sulfurs, fat bodies. Drakes, yeah, you can get a fatter body with a Drake, not a super fat, but fatter than this. And then a Hendrickson, yep, they get a fat body, but not olives and sulfurs. And for you guys, a sulfur is, I think, called a Pale Evening Dun. Okay, so there's my body. Just like before, I like to loop it back around again. I really, really, really like to lock materials in. You can see how I looped it back around there? Okay. There'll be no slippage whatsoever with this. Okay, believe it or not, we're every bit of halfway done. A little bit more back. There we go. Okay, next step up is Solaris Bone Dry. Fantastic material for this. I just put a little bit on the body. I never would have thought this would be good. I thought that this would be bad for dry flies. And I have a friend, Phil Iwani, who really, really, really makes a super nice fly called the Iwani Dun. And he inspired me to do this because I used to dub everybody. And sometimes I would say, man, oh man, it's very hard to get just as thin a body as I want. And then I started playing around with what Phil does, and I can see why he does it. This is an excellent material for this. Then I get my UV light, and for about 10 seconds I rotate this. And voila, perfect, all set. This is a very effective body material. Okay, now next thing I'm going to do is to prepare the hackle. Okay, so finding a nice hackle. I just took a moment to step away from my bench. Here you can see more whiting stuff. This is a different line. This is whiting straight line. It's not the Hebert minor line that I mentioned before. It's just fantastic materials. I mean, this is a dry fly neck feather, and it probably can't even fit in the frame. It's also, realistically, it's a size 14 for a regular dry fly, maybe even a 16. And I'm going to use it here for what amounts to a every bit of a size 12 hook. So trim the hackle so that you leave a little bit extra sticking right off the end there. Not only will it help to make it more durable, but like we did before, actually that's a little too long. Like we did before, I don't want to jam the fiber right up like this, because if I wrap onto where the fibers start off of the stem and I first start to wrap this, the barbules will splay in all directions. So I move it down a little bit and I leave the first 1/8 inch or so bare so I don't have that problem. Okay. And I have that locked in now. Next step is to put the hackle on. Pardon me, put the dubbing on. Okay, so dubbing procured. I'm actually tying this in colors that I would rarely fish unless it was a very, very small olive. This is being tied in a dark olive. That's for viewing purposes. I figured it would show up better against my medium olive type of shirt here. Most of the time I tie medium and light olive. So I have my dubbing. Not much. Right along the shank. A little saliva. Twist it tight. Okay, slide that up. No gaps. Now make just a little bit of a thorax there. Okay, so I have a little bit of a thorax. I'm going to wrap this forward. I like to do 3 turns in the thorax, so I'm not doing them tight next to each other. 1 at the back end, 1 in the middle, 1 at the front end, and I consider these the 3 with the thorax, and then I always take an extra turn to stop the hackle from slipping. 2, 3, 4 wraps. Lock it in there pretty good. The only part of the fly that could realistically possibly fall apart. Okay, so very, very simple. Tail split, Solares on top of a little EP fibers, and to be honest with you, you can just use thread. I really like the effect of a little bit of color differentiation. So if you noticed, I used a little bit of the lighter olive, a little bit of the medium olive, and there's actually a little tiny bit of brown in there. And then thorax and palmered hackle through the thorax. Next step up, my snowshoe rabbit. Notice snowshoe rabbit comes in many, many, many different colors. They'll dye it to whatever you want, and oftentimes it's in actuality a little bit lighter than it appears altogether at once. That's the case here. Okay. You'll notice I trim it off very close to the ends of the butts because I really, really, really like some of that translucent underfur in there. I think it makes it help it float. I think it looks good. So I'm going to lay this over the eye of the hook. Again, no pressure until you go straight down. I'll do 2 of them, and then I'll slide it back. Sometimes I pull it too far, like I might have done right there. If so, I'll just put a little, whatever slipped out, I'll put back on top. Oh, no, not much slipped out. Good. Very good. I was afraid more slipped out. Couple of 8th graders there, not doing what they're supposed to. Isn't that part of being 13 years old? Okay. And here, chop those fibers down. I do like to take a moment here and just hit it with a little bit of crazy glue. And I also jam it back against that bulge. By jamming it against the bulge, it helps kick that wing straight up. Remember before what I said about if I want the wing to lay flat along the body, I keep it even all the way through? And now I want it to kick up, so I had no bulk in front of the thorax. And if I just wrap the threads really tight against this, it kicks them up into the air, creating the wing. Just a little tiny touch of crazy glue right there. I passionately detest when a fly falls apart when I'm fishing it. Here on the Delaware, it's often the case that the rise starts just as we're losing light. So the last thing I want is to have to either turn the light on to see and then I lose my night vision, or tie a fly on in the dark. Not fun. And the last thing I'll do, if this was a smaller fly, like a 16 or an 18, I would stop here and I would not put any dubbing on top of this, a 16, 18, 20. But it's a bigger fly, and bigger flies do have a little bit of bulk here at the very end. So I'm just going to put a little bit of dubbing on there to finish the fly off. There we go. And I told you before, I usually use a whip finish, but this time I'm not. Just very careful about how I put that up into there. I notice I caught one of the hackle fibers. I pull it out, really snug this down. And here I am. I never use I used crazy glue before for all these sub-steps, and I never ever reinforce my whip finish with a little bit of crazy glue or cement or Solaris. But I don't really have flies fall apart because of that either. All right, so how do I trim the wing and how do I trim the hackle? As far as trimming the hackle goes, I'm going to take it out and do it, and then I'll show you afterwards. What I like to do is snip the direct bottom. Trying to make a nice V here. So there it is. You can see it this way, and you can see it that way, and I took out the bottom. And then for the wing, I pick a point straight on the back like this, and I go straight down. And then I follow the path on the front. And there is my wing. You know, it's kind of like spackle. You have to know when enough is enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, and once it gets wet, it's all going to kind of clump together anyway. So there is the Sailboat Dun, and I can't emphasize enough, this is a really effective fly. It's added a little bit of modern materials like Solaris and poly with the body with the EP fibers, the microfibbits. It has the traditional classic lines of the Vince Marinaro school of thorax dun design. So it's a very effective pattern, and if you like to tie something a little bit new and you want to see fish react to it and come to it, this is a really effective fly. I think you'll like it a lot.